We lived on the edge of East New York, where there was an Italian side and a black side. And then when I was around 4, we moved to Queens, to a pretty middle class black neighborhood. Homeowners, lawns, everyone kind of stayed in their section. It was very much understood. There were no whites only signs like the South, but you kind of knew where you were going to live and where you were going. My parents were both from the South, and my mother was from Alabama. My father was from Florida. And in those days, during the Christmas season, we would always drive down south to see both of their respective parents. And I remember one night, my father was a private businessman, entrepreneur, owned a construction company and contractor. And he was a boxer. He had done some boxing, amateur boxing. And so to me, he was invincible, this, athletic, muscular guy. So we were in North Carolina driving to Alabama to see my mother's parents, my grandmother. And my father stopped to get some hamburgers to put in the car uh, so we can eat as we drove. And I remember we went in, and the guy behind the counter said, "We don't serve y'all here." And my father said, "No, we're not going to eat here." And the guy said, "Get out." And I had never seen anyone humiliate my father. I'd never seen anyone even talk like that to my father. And my father owned property in Brooklyn. I used to go with him on weekends to collect the rent. Everybody respected or was scared of my father. And for this little guy to emasculate my father was almost traumatic to me. And when I got into the car, I kept asking him. I'm no more than 6 or 7 years old because my father left us when I was 9, so I couldn't have been more than 7. And I kept saying, "What? Why did he do that?" And that's when my father and mother explained to us that there was segregation, there were places blacks couldn't go, and that they couldn't go to school with whites, and that they couldn't even buy a cup of coffee, and that's how the South was. And that, don't worry about it, that's just how things were. And I never forgot that night to this day, because racism became not only clear to me as a young black boy, but it was the emasculation of my father, which really drove to me. It didn't matter who you were, you had to deal with the color line. I had started preaching when I was 4 years old, and I was already a boy preacher preaching around Brooklyn at the time that this happened. So a lot of the groups, gospel groups, Mahalia Jackson would come and sing at my church. And I remember the Freedom Riders had done a rally at my church. But none of it meant anything to me until that night. I began understanding what some of all this hoopla was about. And I remember when I was 9, in '63, one of the last things that happened before my father left us in Queens is he went to the March on Washington. And Mahalia Jackson, who I had preached on a program she sang on, sang at the march. I met Dr. King twice after the March on Washington. He did rallies in Brooklyn. And I went, and I remember first time I was introduced, I might have been 10 or 11. And he kind of smiled and said, "You're the boy preacher, huh?" And kind of laughed. It was light. At 13, I joined Dr. King's chapter in New York. But my pastor, Bishop Washington, brought me to Reverend William Jones, who led the Operation Breadbasket chapter in New York under Reverend Dr. King and later Reverend Jesse Jackson. I was the youth director. Dr. King ended up getting killed that year, which really was when I went all in then. This is what I want to do. And I felt comfortable. I felt like I was home. I became the youth director. My job was to conduct the youth meetings, to organize young people to do the picket lines, because basically Operation Breadbasket would address the private sector on having blacks and Latinos and Asians on their board of directors, where you're doing business with black-owned businesses, opening up the economic area, which is what Dr. King died doing, challenging the economic disparities. And my job was to make sure we had the young people there that would man the picket lines and do the marches and be at the rallies. I feel that that was my calling, was social justice. Once I got into that, and I just felt very comfortable in doing social justice. Then I formed my own youth movement at 16 years old. And then I started building chapters around the country and then later National Action Network. But it started from my work in Operation Breadbasket. Those of us that led those movements were to enforce what happened in the 60s because it wasn't valid if it wasn't enforced. Affirmative action to make sure that schools were making sure we could get in. So you have the opening the door, and then you have to come with the generation behind that test to make sure the door is open. Then you have the generation that we're in now that has to crack the door open more. And that's the age of President Obama, that not only can we get in, but we can excel. So you can be President of the United States. You can be Attorney General. At the same time, you got all of those forces fighting to erode it. So now you still are fighting where to keep the Voting Rights Act in as law, and racial profiling laws. So you don't have the white only at the water fountain. It's just the glass ceiling in the private sector. Or you don't have that you can't buy a hamburger here like my father. It's just that the security will follow you around in a high-end store in East Side Manhattan. So the fight is still there. It's just at another level. And because I saw people win the fights in my youth, made me know we could win the fights now. I know that speech Dr. King gave has impact because 50 years later, his son and I organized a commemoration march, and over 200,000 people came. And most of them weren't even born when he made that speech. So that dream has an indelible imprint on the American mentality. It became a dream not just for blacks. It was a dream for gays and lesbians and Latinos and women. And I think Dr. King would have been proud because it was never a black dream. It was an American dream. It was a dream for everybody.